have a leased land, and suppose if you sell and you get some money from your leased land, then what happens? That is also comes under wealth tax, because which you have inherited from your grandfather, and suppose now it has come to you, and now if the leased land, if you sell, so will there be any wealth tax on that?
Means, if I understand correctly, there is a plot of land.
Leased property.
There's a plot of, no, property or land?
Land.
So there's a plot of land which is leased by the MIDC or MBPT or
trust,
whoever.
From a trust. From the leased land which was from the trust, Dinsha Trust or something, one of those trusts.
No, so who is the owner of the land?
Somebody else.
And you are the...
Lessee.
You are the lessee.
Now.
Yeah, so basically the wealth tax is on assets owned by the SSE, by the taxpayer. As far as lease is concerned, if it is a long leg, suppose 999 years lease, then it is as good as ownership. So you will need to get into the facts of your case and check with your chartered accountant as to what is the actual status. But if it is a long lease, you need to be careful. Yeah.
No, but the name of the landlord is still there. The owner of the land is still there.
Yeah, fine. Yeah. So that way, even government owns. Mumbai Port Trust owns half of this side of Mumbai, but the leases are 999 years. So further, he is the owner.
The name of the lessee is just included a few days back.
See, the wealth tax is payable on the wealth as on 31st March every year. So as on every 31st March, whatever is your wealth, as per that list, and if the value of that as per Wealth Tax Act. So it is, I don't want to scare you. I don't want to say that, for example, if you have two houses, one house, as I said, is exempt, the other house is in Malabar Hill, value is obviously 8-9 crores. I am not saying that you have to pay wealth tax on that 8-9 crores. I am saying that wealth tax, just check out whether wealth tax is applicable to you. If yes, list out your assets and do the valuation or get a professional help to do it as per the Wealth Tax Act. Just as I mentioned in Income Tax Act, what is important is total income, which is not our concept of the common man's concept of income. It is different because it has to be computed as per Income Tax Act. Same way wealth is to be computed as per Wealth Tax Act. There are different rules laid down for valuation of every kind of asset. Okay, and based on that, if the value exceeds 30 lakhs, then you need to pay wealth tax. So for example, you mentioned this name was added some recently. So if March 13 you were not there, then you don't have to worry about it as far as March 13 is concerned. But March 14, if you continue, then you need to take care.
My question, on what basis does the Income Tax Department decide to pick up cases for scrutiny? Is there any logic, any algorithm? Are there certain cases which are never going to be taken up for scrutiny because they're too small, too low, or whatever? No, good. I have reasonably scared you about the scrutiny. So you should know that scrutiny doesn't happen for all taxpayers. It happens only for the cases that are selected for scrutiny. So there are certain criteria which the government lays down every year. So every year they come out with different criteria. So there could be different criteria. So one criteria, for example, is that exemptions claimed in excess of a particular amount. At one point of time, it was 10 lakh rupees or something like that. So say there is a company which is in a SEZ. So therefore, it has got exempt income under section 10A or 10AA, etc. So if the SSE has claimed exemption exceeding a particular amount, it fell in the criteria for selection for scrutiny. Another was that, in the earlier year there was a scrutiny and some addition was made in that year and it has got confirmed in appeal or the SSE has not disputed it. Then again this year you need to take up for scrutiny. So there are different criteria. If you want, I can email you the current year's criteria. I don't know it offhand, but there are certainly criteria laid down. Now what may happen is that you may not fall in any of the criteria. So you have not claimed such a high exemption, you have never been picked up this, that. Then there is what is known as CASS, Computer Aided something, scrutiny or whatever, CASS. Under CAS, then it is like a jackpot,
that they will, not obviously they will not guma it, but ulta of jackpot. Yeah. So on random basis, they just pick a few cases for for scrutiny. Even salaried people cases have come up for scrutiny in the past on a random basis. So if you are unfortunate enough to fall in the random scrutiny, then also your case may come up for scrutiny.
You mentioned about the returns come reasonably fast now with electronic filing.
Refunds.
Refunds. Now, by and large, that is true. But if there is a large refund due and it doesn't come, you keep writing to Bangalore and nothing happens, what can be done? Is there a supervising authority or somebody that one can write to?
Yeah, I think it's good. Forget about CPC. Even otherwise, what happens if you don't get your refund? Because refund is easily the biggest, ultimately you want your money back, In many cases, the officer has passed an order, he has determined the amount of refund due to you, but still you don't get it. Yeah. Let me tell you one thing, this is obviously not to be quoted, but since they are recording, it will come on record, but I don't care. The government is bankrupt. Okay, they have no money. And genuinely, this is not a loose comment, this is a fact. They don't have money. Internally, they have been clearly told, all the officers, don't give any refunds. Okay. So if you fall in the category of cases which are being handled physically, manually by the officers, then to get a refund is, is very difficult. On the other hand, you mentioned about CPC, that electronically filed return, big refund is due, but you are not getting it. I think what you need to do, I have not come across such cases. Generally, if there is no problem, the refund will come to you because they have their internal performance appraisal based on how fast they are not only processing the return, but how fast they are issuing the refunds. Let me share an actual example. In my introduction, he mentioned about Bombay Chartered Accountants Society. The CPC for the first time invited BCAS to visit the premises over there in Bangalore. No outsider is allowed. It is high security area, but we went there and the commissioner over there made a request to us that when you go back to Bombay, you please tell your members, means our members, BCA members, that is chartered accountants, to tell their clients that if they have a refund and if they have not got it, please verify whether the bank account given by you is correct in the bank, in the return form. Why? The CPC was complaining to us that we have issued the refunds, but they are coming back because of wrong bank account numbers and we don't want to keep them. We want to get rid of those refunds. This was the quality of people in the CPC. So CPC per se, there will not be delays. The delay will happen, and I think it's important that we all know it, that what happened is about 2 or 3 years back, the CBDT gave instructions to all officers across India to upload on the same system the details of all demands outstanding from every taxpayer. Okay. So these Charlies have a register called a DC register demand some register where they mention all the demands. So the moment an order is passed and a demand is raised, they enter in that. So based on that register, they entered the demand online without verifying whether any of those demands have got rectified or appeal was there and it got knocked out. The updation did not happen. The wrong data got uploaded in thousands of cases. And CPC, what it does is, when a refund arises, first it checks online, is there a demand? If there is a demand, theoretically they are supposed to send you a letter saying that under so-and-so section, we propose to adjust this refund against the demand for so-and-so year. If you have any objection or if anything is wrong with the demand, as mentioned by us, please approach your local officer and get it sorted out. That is where the problem lies. On the one hand, we have a highly sophisticated set of tax department working, overnight to give you back your money. At the other end, there is a department which refuses to do anything manually. So when this happens, in my own case it has happened. So I have to go to my ITO here in Aikar Bhavan, and that fellow or that lady or the guy he is not interested in rectifying. So in those cases, it will be difficult to get a refund from the CPC. If your case is that, falls in that category, you need to sort out the matter at the local end. Once the local end does that sorting out, you will 101% get your refund very quickly from CPC.
Exactly what you said, sir. The local officer needs to rectify the previous outstandings due on the CPC. After 1 year of continuous follow-up with the deputy commissioner, nothing happened. Finally, I filed a 10 rupee RTI and things got rectified.
Absolutely.
And sir, even after that, even after rectifying, and I've still not got my refund that is for 1230.
Okay. So there are two.
And surprisingly, the demand outstanding being shown is for assessment year 7-8 and 8-9, where both the assessment years I have received refund from the department.
Yeah, correct. Very similar to my case, But anyway, so those who are not getting refunds or where you are facing problem with the tax department, there are two options. One is, as he rightly said, RTI, file an RTI. They are little wary of RTI, but RTI is also now becoming a sort of a tool which these guys have got used to, The other very important tool available to a common man is the ombudsman. So the government appoints ombudsmen for different, government departments. In income tax also there is an ombudsman. The office is at Nariman Point in Ernest House. So there is a system on the income tax website. You will get the process of how you can approach the ombudsman. I think it will be a good idea for you to do a program on ombudsman. Call that guy personally over. Ombudsman works because. But before going to the ombudsman, first you need to have your paperwork in place. So you need to write 2-3 letters to your ITO, whoever is your officer. He will obviously not take any action. Then you write to his boss, the next guy. After that, that fellow is also not going to take action. After that, you write to the higher up. Ultimately, you have to build up a case that, despite repeated reminders to all the small up, higher level, nothing has happened. Then complain to the ombudsman. You see whether you get it in 1 month or not.
If you are owner of an urban land which is encroached, are you still entitled to pay wealth tax, because we are already paying taxes to BMC? And the collector has stopped collecting tax in 71. As you know, that the case is lying in Bombay High Court for increasing the values of the taxes that the collector is supposed to collect. And there are two types of land. One is Toka land and the other one is Foras land, which I identified. Toka, the revenue can be increased. On Foras land is supposed to be marshy salt pan lands. So on that there is no revenue increase. So what do? Do we pay wealth tax?
Yeah, good question.
In spite of the encroachments.
Lot of time the land also gets not only encroached, but sometimes it goes in the nada, or that it gets eaten away. And the other something came to my mind based on what, so I'll answer both. Not that I'm evading your question, but Campacola. Okay, 6 months in May, top floor gets demolished. What happens? Are you the owner or not the owner? So anyway, as far as your question is concerned, it basically boils down to, see, first of all, if you have land and if you sort of fulfill all the conditions of the Wealth Tax Act, you need to pay wealth tax. The question is on what value. So how do you value that land? I think your main issue is about the valuation of the land, because it is encroached, this, that. So if you go to sell today, nobody will touch it also. That is what I think you're trying to bring out. So as I explained in answer to the question over here, that there are schedules of rules laid down in the Wealth Tax Act for the valuation purpose, for the valuation of the different assets. For land also, there, the value will be sort of the valuation method will be laid down. Where the value, so suppose your land is in, for example, in Andheri, where the value, an exact similar plot of land next to yours got sold, 2 months back at, say, 30 crores. So do you expect to pay wealth tax on 30 crores? Or what is the question? So the way I would, if you are my client and you came to me, I think I would build up a case with all the documents, bringing out that this land is encroached. Because of the encroachment, because of all the litigation, X, Y, Z, Z, whatever, build up the case and bring out that the value is hardly anything or whatever it is. That is one. And second is, ideally, get it valued by a government approved valuer. that you will have to obviously incur a cost, but that cost benefit ratio you need to work out, So I would get it valued by a government valuer, and when they do that, they will definitely take into consideration all these extra circumstances, which affect the valuation. And about the two categories of land, I have no clue what you were mentioning. Bottom line is, if it is urban land, it is subject to wealth tax. Now, whether it is cultivable or not, all that is not the point. Agricultural land is not subject to wealth tax, but any land in the certain boundaries of a municipal corporation falls in the definition of taxable land.
So this 26 AS doesn't reflect what we have at TDS, for example. If we have a TDS certificate, sometimes it is not reflecting. Say, I have experienced 9, 10, 11, 12 last, few years back. My quite a few things were not reflecting, and I had accounted in my tax return. So can it be rectified?
Can what be rectified?
The 26 AS.
That's what I said. 100.
Till what year? What is the time bound?
26 AS is a dynamic form which keeps. So
Financial year 9, 10.
Let me illustrate.
Okay.
Somebody say. Same example, bank has paid you interest, has deducted tax, but that TDS does not appear in your 26 AS, correct? Now, if you are my client and you ask me what to do while filing the return, I'll tell you, obviously claim it in your return. Why would you not claim it? Because you have a TDS certificate, so we will claim it. We are filing your return electronically, so it is processed also electronically. When that happens, it electronically matches with your 26 years. 26 years doesn't have TDS, they will not give you credit. Okay? So what is it that you have to do? First of all, as I said, you need to be very alert and regular. If you find that it is not there, approach the deductor immediately. What the deductor needs to do is revise the TDS return that is filed and rectify the mistake that they made with reference to you. Okay. So the moment they file a revised TDS return, which is also nowadays in any case electronic, to be filed electronically, the moment they do that and the correct PAN of you goes in that, it will automatically come into your 26 AS. So when that happens, once you verify your 26 AS and find that entry there, you apply for rectification.
But is there a time bound thing? If it is financial year 8, 9, 10, anything?
There's no time bound that.
Okay.
This 26 AS issue, when I went to the ombudsman of the bank, it actually got rectified, and instead of the advance tax for that year, it came as a self-assessment tax, and the bank actually had to pay to income tax because it was lying in the inter-branch reconciliation account. So you have to follow up with the ombudsman. The ombudsman is very useful. I had a very positive experience with the bank.
As you have rightly said, that my tax is deducted by somebody and he has not paid. So he will be prosecuted or he will be penalized. But what about me, whether I will get that credit or not? Because that fellow has already deducted tax, but he has not paid. So what is my position?
See, in this kind of cases, it is a painful process because you have the proof that he has deducted because you have got only net amount. So that proof you have. You may not have a TDS certificate because that fellow not even paid it. So there is no question of him issuing a TDS certificate. In the past, bogus TDS certificates could be issued. Now that is no longer possible because TDS certificates are generated online. So you can't play around with that TDS certificate also. So either you have the certificate or you don't have it. In the case that you have mentioned, he has not paid, so you don't have the TDS certificate, but you obviously will not want to pay the tax again, because somebody has already cut it. As it is, you have suffered a shortfall. So in that kind of a situation, you will have to follow up with with your officer, give the proof that, I got 100, I was supposed to get 100 rupees minus, that fellow has deducted 10, I have got only 90. This is the print, my bank statement shows 90, letter from them giving the check shows it is 90, and now what you want to do, you do through him, do to him, But this is a painful subject, and practically, I would say that they will recover the money from you. Ultimately, you will have to fight with the deductor and get the fellow to reimburse you. Sorry. No, Delhi, I'm saying practically. That's why I mentioned practically. Theoretically, a lot of things are there. Delhi High Court, you're right. Delhi High Court passed strictures against the income tax department and fired them that how dare you do this, but that it is still happening today. It is still happening.
So you stressed on the importance of documentation. Now, these documentation, do they have to be physical or can they also be electronic?
I think as long as you are able to print it at a later date. I mean, so for example, mutual fund statements, if you or Demat account, if you have access to your bank online, net banking, and you are able to download at any point of time, there is no problem. You can keep it electronic, or even other things you can scan and keep. That's up to you.
So I can destroy the physical document as long as I can keep a scan.
Yeah, but it depends on what document. Like books of accounts, I would rather that you keep physical books of accounts. But other stuff, yeah.
Similar to what was just asked. Now, in case of dividend warrants, which have also started coming electronically, do we have to keep printouts? Yeah. And more important are the share transaction contracts which are now being sent electronically.
Yeah.
In some cases, they may be several hundreds in a year.
Yeah.
So do we take printouts of each and every one and keep? Because the idea behind sending them electronically is saving cost and saving the tree.
Yeah.
Here again, I'm
absolutely
incurring a cost and killing a tree.
So my answer is same, that wherever you have something in electronic format, as long as you save it and you're in a position to retrieve it at a later date, there should not be a problem. Even dividend warrants, what I am doing is I have created a folder in my email account for dividend warrants or for income tax, and all of the thing that comes, when paper came, we put it in a file. When email comes, you put it in a electronic file, So keep it there. If and when you need it in future, you print it at that time. But so since you have now, I think, understood the importance of the documentation, now the next step is how well you maintain it. So sophistication will have to be brought in even e-storage. So for example, your dividend warrants. Now if you keep all the year's dividend warrants in one folder, maybe you may find it difficult to sort of retrieve it. So you create different folders for every year and keep everything relating to one particular year in one folder, So all dividend warrant emails in one folder and so on and so forth, All bank statements which come electronically, all broker statements which come, broker contracts which come electronically, all that in one folder for 1 year. So that if that year's matter comes up anytime before any authority and you need to print, that everything is lying in this folder, you just start printing from that folder. Yeah, but I certainly don't want you to start, taking out printouts and keeping, because that, as you rightly said, it defeats the purpose,
Sir, if the income is non-taxable, still is it necessary to file the return?
No.
If at a given point of time the person's income was taxable and later on it was not, so it is not necessary to file?
Not necessary. No. Okay. Only thing is that, and this may be relevant to some of you, is that many times people just want to continue the file in the tax department's record for whatever reasons. Sometimes what happens, you go for a visa or you go for a loan, or they ask you give your last 3 years returns. Now genuinely you did not have, you have last year's return. The year before that you did not have income, taxable income, so you did not file. And the third year you had filed. So there is a break. That may hamper your smooth flow of whatever transaction that you want to take. From that perspective, if you want to continue, you may file, but statutorily there is no mandate. As I told you, it is required only to be filed only when it crosses the threshold limit, or you are signatory to a foreign bank account, or you have foreign assets.
So you said that we have to file returns beyond a certain threshold limit, given 2 lakhs, 2.5 lakhs and 5 lakhs. Now, that is after considering deductions or prior to considering deductions?
After deduction.
And sir, one more question that is regarding national savings certificates. Can you take it in joint names?
No, I did not say that you don't take it in joint name. What I said is that the deduction is available only if you invest in your name, meaning the first name, either your single name, your own name, or first name yours and second name wife. Yeah, of course. Yeah. In India, I think, the concept of Hindu undivided family, equal rights to women, everyone does most of the investment jointly. So that's not a problem. I was only saying that if the investment is, so if it is ulta, if the wife's name is first and your name is second, then you may have a problem in getting deduction. You may have a problem in getting deduction. Your wife will not, because it is in her name. Technically, as I tell my client, that ultimately the first name is the owner. Unless you have actually contributed, the second name person has also contributed.
This total income word is used at many places. So is it gross total income or total taxable income?
No, so after deductions, taxable income.
Wherever total income is
Yes.
said, then it is the net taxable income.
Yes.
Salaried individual who is unmarried can form an HUF when involving his parents?
To be honest, I don't know. I'll find out and let you know. I have no idea. So his question is, can an unmarried person, I think salaried or unsalaried is not relevant, whether an unmarried male, Hindu male, can form an HUF. I think a child, offspring is required. So a father, your father can, if form an HUF, and you will be part of that HUF.
My father, sir.
Yes, Karta will be-
But sir, I being a Karta and my parents being age old.
No, I don't
so
think
that
so. I don't think so, but as I said, I'm not 100% sure. You'll need to check. But first, prima facie answer is no.
Okay, thank you.
That's what I told him, but he's talking. Okay, so I stand corrected.
Can a gift be given to a daughter-in-law and a son-in-law by a person? Can a gift be given to a daughter-in-law?
Yeah.
It's allowed. Second thing is the gift received has to be shown in the exempt income. In the exempt income column, in the
that is a good $1 million question. Whether gift is, since it is exempt, is it to be shown?
Right.
Now, as I told you earlier, that even that ITR 1 depends on whether your exempt income is less than 5,000 or more than 5,000, etc. So, is gift an income? Is the question. Then, if the answer to that is yes, then all other answers follow. So, the answer to your question, per se, gift is not income, unless it is received from a non-relative, and that also more than 50,000. So therefore, for example, if you receive a gift from your own family member who falls in that list, it is not taxable in your hands, and then in that case, if you don't show it in your return, I don't think there is any downside.
I have a flat and I also have one room in redevelopment project. So can that room be, after the room is redeveloped in a flat?
Can the room be?
I mean, the room will be redeveloped, the room has gone in redevelopment project. So after redevelopment, I will get a flat.
Yeah.
So I'm already having a flat.
Yeah.
And after getting that flat,
then you will be considered as being owner of 2 residential house properties.
Yeah.
And subject to the rules of wealth tax, you will need to decide whether you need to pay wealth tax.
applicable, no?
Okay, with that we bring the session to a close.